Ashe. Ashe is the word, the source of I and I ancestors. Ashe is the source that holds all things together. Ashe is I source, I shield, and I protector. Ashe is I source, I guide, and I provider. Ashe is I source, and that is why I am not black. Ashe is I source, I cannot be lack. Ashe is I source, I light, and I deliverer. Ashe is I source, I healer, and I teacher. Ashe is I source, I leader, and I spiritual fire. Ashe is I source, I strength. Each day I be more and more. Ashe is I source, I spiritual comforter. Each day I be more stronger. Ashe is I source, I sustainer. Each day my life is filled with more pleasure. Ashe walk with I daily to much green and greener pastures. Ashe walk with I beside some very cold and deadly waters. Ashe walk I through the valley of blackness and under the shadow of blackness. And so I fear no evil or what the devils may try to do, for it's Ashe, I say. Ashe, 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 I say to you all my highly enriched melanin, my highly enriched carbon skin brothers and sisters, my fellow Africans, Mother Earth's original, Mother Earth's natural, native, and organic humans the world over. And welcome back, one and all, to this another perspective with I, the mystic philosopher. It's high time for reason and for reasoning. As it is my custom to do, please let me take this opportunity right here and now and say goodwill to all those of you that have given, and those of you that may give, and all those of you that will give of your very limited resources, aka your very precious time, just to join in, to watch and listen to this video broadcast and podcast. Goodwill to all those of you that take time out to subscribe to my YouTube channel called The Right Number, and to my blog post at themysticp.com. Goodwill to all those of you that may or that will take time out to donate and to support what I'm doing, and especially goodwill to all those of you that have and that may and that will purchase my music and messages in songs. Goodwill to all those of you that may or that will take the time out to participate in the discussions, to critique and to write comments. Goodwill to all those of you that may or that will intelligently, informatively, and respectfully rebut with the honest intent of highlighting or correcting any and all possible statements or information that you might perceive to be erroneous and misleading, or that you can or that you may prove to be incorrect and misleading. And goodwill to all those of you that will share your own perspectives on any of the topics that are covered in this or any series of lecture presentations by I, the mystic philosopher. Welcome Thank you and goodwill to you all. The topic of this series of presentation is the art of living well, another perspective and interpretation of Desiderata. And this is part 5. Now, if you haven't yet watched or listened to part 1 through to part 4a, I strongly suggest that you do so before you watch or listen to this part 5 or any other parts in this series. So in part 4 through to part 4a of this, my analysis, my interpretation, and my perspective of Desiderata, in which I also quoted and focused a bit on Dr. Dorothy Law's poem in order to help add more emphasis to some of my points. I think that I have clearly answered and explained my interpretation of what is meant by, quote, children learn what they live. So here in this part 5, I will just continue where I left off with my quote and commentary on each stanza of this poem, Children Learn What They Live. But before I continue, I must remind you and keep reminding you, my melanin people, we the Earth's organic and natural native earthly humans, we the Earth's original pre-Adamic and highly melanin skin, highly carbon enriched humans, commonly called Africans. I must remind you, and I must keep reminding you, of the fact that all our troubles that we are now facing and those that we have faced in the past began with and when the devils came down and invaded this our planet and our Mother Earth. And with the creation of the humankind, yes, the kind of human, aka the creature called Adam and his descendants, his Adamic race and races is also known as the civilized races of mankind. Satan and his host of devils, along with the Adamic race and races, are the cause of all our problems upon this, our Mother Earth. They are our enemies. They are the plague, the curse that have visited and infested our planet and Mother Earth. And once you know and understand this fact, then you, like myself, will be better able and better positioned, both mentally, spiritually, and physically, to cope and to endure the vicious onslaught upon us and upon our Mother Earth and all of our fellow natural earthlings. For those of you that have been listening and watching my lectures and my lecture presentation thus far, you know that this is a topic that I have covered in much greater detail elsewhere. But it is imperative that I keep reminding you of who and what our real and formidable enemies are. And if by now you really and truly don't know, and you really and truly can't figure out who and what Satan and his devils and who and what the Adamic race and races are, the Adamic race and races, also known as the civilized races of man, if you don't know who they are, then, as my mom used to say, dog, eat your supper. For it is by their fruits that you shall know them. It is by their fruits. That's how you know them. But let's continue. And I quote, "If children live with shame, they learn to feel guilty," unquote. So now you know why some of us have lived our lives and are currently living our lives in total guilt and shame. So now you know why some of us, if not most of us, have lived our lives and are living our lives feeling as if they are feeling as if we have committed a crime just for being born and just for being alive. Feeling as if they or feeling as if we are responsible for everything that goes wrong and for all the sins of the world, even the weather when it is bad. Now you know. So now we know that it is because we were brought up in shame and were forced to live with shame and were taught to live with shame. At home, some of us, if not most of us, were shamed and disgraced for almost everything that we did or almost everything that we tried to do. And to make it even worse, some of us, if not most of us, were shamed and disgraced in front of other people. Some of whom were our friends and companions, we were disgraced and shamed in their presence. And the same goes for us being shamed, humiliated, and disgraced at school, where our teachers would shame and humiliate us right in front of the whole class, if not right in front of the whole school. Sometimes for things we were accused of doing, and that we were oftentimes not even guilty of doing it. Example, some of us were shamed, disgraced, and even punished severely by being whipped in front of the whole class and sometimes in front of the whole school just for getting a math problem wrong or just for not being able to spell a word correctly. You name it. And we were shamed, humiliated, and made to feel guilty for it. And the same goes for us being shamed, disgraced, and humiliated at church and in church as well. Sometimes the preacher or the pastor or the deacon or the Sabbath school or Sunday school teacher would embarrass us in front of the whole congregation. Some of us were forced to sit at the back of the church, which is also known as being backbenched, if the pastor suspected that we had so-called fornicated. Among many other of his or her suspicions, we were placed at the back of the church, backbench they call it. In some churches, young girls or young women could not attend church or assembly services if they were having their natural monthly cycles. You name it. And we were ashamed for it. One of the first lessons that I can remember learning and being taught as a child, both by my parents at home and by my teachers at school, and by my pastors and others at church, is that sin is evil. That evil is the opposite of good. That sin and the practice thereof is of the evil entity called Satan, the devil. And that to commit sin or to do sin is to commit evil. And to be of the devil. When we commit evil, we are of the devil. I was taught that at a young and early age. And the very second lessons that I remember learning and being taught is that I was conceived in sin, that I was born in sin, and that I was shaped in iniquity. And just for your information, iniquity is another word for wickedness, shamefulness, immorality, and evil, etc. Therefore, I was being told by my parents at home, my teachers at school, and my priests, my pastors, my preachers, my Sunday and Sabbath school teachers, and fellow church members at church, that I was born in sin and shaped in wickedness, that I was shaped in sinfulness, that I was shaped in immorality and evil, etc. And yet still these same people in their twisted mindset still expect that good would come of me. And the third lesson that I can remember being taught is that I was a sinner, meaning that I was no good, that I was by nature and by my mere existence wicked, and that unless I repented meaning that unless I felt sorry for myself, pitiful for myself, and admit to being a sinner, unless I admit to being a wicked, a no good human, and confessed to an unseen God that is out there in a place called heaven, somewhere out there in the sky, from where he had me under 24-hour surveillance, from where he was stalking me like Santa Claus. For he knows when I was sleeping, he knows when I was awake, he knows when I have been good or bad. So I should be good for goodness sake. And who, by the way, was supposedly my Heavenly Father as well. I was taught that unless I admitted and confessed to him or to his earthly representative, the priest or the pastor, that I am no good, unless I confess to them that I am no good and that I am a no good person, and unless I felt and expressed sorrow for my sin and show remorse and shame for my sin, the sins that due to no fault of mine, then I would not only suffer in this life, but also that I would burn forever in an ever and forever, that I would burn forever and ever and forever in a place called hell, that he, God, my so-called Heavenly Father, has lovingly prepared for me in another life after this. Personally, I can't remember being told by my family that raised me, or by the family that raised me, that I should be proud of myself or that I should feel good about myself. All that I can remember being told is that I should be damn ashamed of myself, especially when I used to wet my bed as a child. They would even threaten to come to my school while it was in session and tell the whole school that I piss bed or that I used to wet my bed. Some of us are ashamed of our own family, and especially ashamed of some members of our family or families. Some of us are ashamed of our history. Some of us are ashamed of our ancestors. Some of us are ashamed of where we were born and raised. We are ashamed of the house or home in which we were born and raised. Some of us are ashamed of where we currently live, the area we lived, the house we lived in. Some of us are ashamed of the transportation we use, example, the car we drive. Some of us are ashamed of our spouses, our children. Some of us are ashamed of our occupation, our jobs, you name it. Some of us are ashamed of it. And why are they? Or why are we ashamed and feel guilty, you may ask? It is because it is because we were brought up and raised in an environment whereby our parents were themselves suffering from shame, also known as inferiority complex. And regrettably, we learn it from them. And all these put down from our childhood to now, the evidence has shown and will no doubt continue to show that it is the result of what was done to our ancestors by Satan and his seeds, the Adamic race and races, aka the civilized races of man. And I quote, if children live with acceptance, they learn to live. And I quote again, if children live with acceptance, they learn to live, unquote. First, what is acceptance? Or what is the idea and message that is being enveloped and hereby expressed in this poem by the word acceptance? From idealistic philosophers' perspective, acceptance is being able to accept, welcome and embrace who we are, what we are, where we are, and our station or our status or position in the universe and in this thing called life. It is the ability to know, understand, and accept our individuality and to embrace the fact that we are all unique, or we are all uniquely different, and that our source and mother nature, in her infinite wisdom, has chosen to manifest us as who we are, what we are, and where we are. And in a world that is filled with so much noise and haste, as described earlier, or in my earlier lectures in this series, everyone and everything that is unique will stand out and does stand out. And as a consequence, you or it will be attacked by things and those with the potential and the intention to kill you, to destroy you. So just for survival alone, an integral part of parenting is for us to teach our children acceptance. It is for us to teach our children what is acceptance, and above all, is for us to teach them acceptance of themselves. For the evidence will show, and the evidence has shown, that if our children are not taught to accept themselves, along with all related truths, then instead of them living a productive life in a state of self-awareness, also known as knowledge of self, then instead of living, they will just be existing. They will just be surviving. They will just be floating on the waves of life and drifting through life, unpredictable path, in a state of ignorance, confusion, and misery. The fact is, however, that before we as parents can or may accept to teach our children acceptance, or rather, before we as parents may attempt to teach our children acceptance, then we must have been taught and must have learned this lesson, the lesson of acceptance first, and therefore first accept ourselves. How many of us can truly and honestly say that we were taught acceptance by our parents? Or that our parents truly taught us to accept ourselves, as I have mentioned and explained above? And that our parents knew themselves and had accepted themselves? I will hereby take the liberty and say, if at all any, it is but the very few. So now you know why some of us, if not most of us, are not living but are just merely existing and surviving in a state of confusion while being aimlessly drift along by merciless waves and the current of this reality. Now, quote, if children live with tolerance, they learn patience, unquote. Now, what is tolerance? Or what is meant by the word tolerance? The word tolerance is a very interesting one, and one that must be dealt with very carefully in order not to misinterpret the point that is being made here. According to one Google search dictionary, tolerant is, and I quote, 1. The ability or willingness to tolerate something. In particular, the existence of opinions or behavior that one does not necessarily agree with, unquote. The key interpretation that I would like for you to take away from this meaning is, and I quote, in particular, the existence of opinions or behavior that one does not necessarily agree with. Tolerance. First example. One may find oneself in a situation wherein one is very uncomfortable and is in total disagreement with arguments and or activities that might be taking place. Disgusting and potentially derogatory remarks that are being made, or even other forms of corruptions that are being done, etc. But due to circumstances beyond one's control, the wisest thing that one may have to do at that time in order to survive and maybe live to tell is to tolerate the current situation, even though one is in total disagreement with it. Due to the circumstances, one may have to tolerate it. Second example, one might be a passenger in a vehicle or traveling on a highway, or possibly driving through a very violent city, and the driver of that vehicle might be driving very recklessly and definitely not to one's approval. But when all things are considered, the wisest thing that one can do in order to survive is to tolerate his reckless driving until one gets out of the car and out of all possible dangers, of other possible dangers. And the third example of tolerance is one of our parents, or a parent might be in a very abusive relationship with another parent or a spouse. But in order to get out of it safely along with us, the children, he or she might have to tolerate the abuse until the opportunity arises whereby he or she might exit safely. We have a saying, or my mom used to say, if your hand is in a lion's mouth, you should take time, be very careful how you pull it out. Fourth example of tolerance. We might hear some people boasting that they are the most tolerant people, or that they are the most tolerant country and society in the world, and especially how they are the most tolerant of us, the people they call black people. They call us black people. But now you know the meaning and definition of the word tolerant. or now that you know the meaning and definition of the word tolerant and what it truly means, or what it truly meant by being tolerant, you may understand that it is not necessarily because they may like or that they may love us for who and what we are. But it could also mean that they are just being tolerant of us until they can figure out how to dispose of us, or until the opportunity presents itself for them to dispose of us. So please, don't be deceived by those who are telling us that they are tolerant and they are a tolerant society. It's just because they haven't figured out how to totally erase us from off this planet and totally eliminate us. So they are boasting about their tolerance. So please bear that in mind. Fifth example of the word tolerant. Our parents might have been financially deprived, broke, aka poor, and consequently they had to live and endured poverty. Not because they love the condition of poverty and the oftentimes embarrassment that it brought upon them, but they had to forbear the situation in order to get us and themselves out of that poverty and into a much better living condition. So please note that they did not seek or partake in any illegal or immoral activities in order to get us and themselves out of poverty. They did not go and prostitute themselves. They did not go rob, kill, and steal, etc. from other people to raise us. But they proudly, patiently, wisely, and with dignity tolerated the poverty and worked their way out of it. And those are some of the greatest lessons that a child and that our children can or will even learn from being tolerant. And thus, they learn all the virtues of patience. So in summary, to tolerate is to forbear with, to refrain from, to accept, to put up with, to endure certain circumstances or conditions, not because one is in favor of such or is in agreement with such, but because it might be the wisest thing to do at the time. Again, I quote, "If children live with recognition, they learn it is good to have a goal." Unquote. If children live with recognition, they learn it's good to have a goal. How many of us parents and adults today that can honestly say that we had received constant and duly recognition from our parents when we were children? And how many of us today that can honestly say that we gave our children due recognition? Or that we were given, or that we are giving our children due recognition? How many of us can truly say that? The fact is that most of us as children were not duly recognized or duly rewarded by our parents for most, if not for all of the good deeds that we had done. And nor were we duly recognized or duly rewarded for our goals, dreams, for our aspirations that we had sometimes so enthusiastically shared with them. In fact, some of our parents stifled and killed our goals, our dreams and aspirations, dead in their tracks, the moment that we revealed them to them. And due to this lack of recognition, we ended up losing interest and we simply stopped setting goals. My late mom used to say that encouragement sweetens labor. And just like a pet animal that is rewarded for completing a task, well done, and is inspired to do much better next time. The same principle applies to our children. Just as how we reward a pet or an animal when they complete a task, and when the task is well done, the same principle applies to our children. The more they are recognized, the more they endeavor to perform much better at the task at hand. And Benjamin Franklin supposedly once said, and I quote, "If you fail to plan, you are planning to fail," unquote. And the evidence has shown, and the evidence is showing that most of us have lived our lives without a goal or without goals. And where there is no goal, there is no plan to achieve. And where there is no plan to achieve, we are already doomed to fail or to failure. So now you know why most of our children and young people have no goals and are just drifting along with any wind that blow their way. And I quote, "If children live with honesty, they learn truthfulness," unquote. Regretfully, some of us had the very unfortunate experience growing up with or growing up around some very dishonest parents and some very dishonest people. Very unfortunately, but it's true. Some of us were raised by parents and people that were so dishonest that they couldn't even trust themselves, let alone trust someone else. Some of them had parents that were liars and cheaters beyond description. For example, some of us have grown up with parents that we see as soon as daddy went off to work, Uncle Jimmy or Uncle somebody roped in to have prayer meeting in the bedroom with mommy. Some of us grew up knowing that daddy had multiple women and that he was never faithful to mommy. Some of us grew up only to learn later in life that daddy was not really a him, but a she him. And that mommy was not really a her, but a person in transition, etc., etc., etc. Consequently, we learn that things and people are not always what they appear to be, and that no one, not even our own parents, can ever be fully trusted or should ever be fully trusted. So now you know why some of us, even our own children, are so mistrustful. It is because they were raised among dishonest parents or among dishonest people. And where did all of this trouble, again let me repeat, where did all of this trouble begin? It began with Satan the devil and his host of devils, his seeds, his agents of force and forces. It began when Satan the devil and his host of devils, yes, his Satan's seeds, his agents of force and forces, when they came down and invaded our Mother Earth. And with the creation of the Adam and his Adamic race and races, also known as the civilized races of man, and their invasion of our motherland called Africa, and their vicious chattel slavery and exploitation of our people. Yes, exploitation of us by the Adamic race and races. And yes, the struggle for our survival still continued to this day. And again I quote, "If children live with fairness, they learn justice," unquote. What is fairness? What is unfairness? And what are some practical examples of a child or of children being treated unfairly. Fairness by meaning and definition is, and I quote, impartial and just treatment or behavior without favoritism or discrimination, unquote. Unfairness by meaning and definition is the opposite of fairness. It is, and I quote, partial and unjust treatment or behavior with favoritism or discrimination, unquote. Simply put, unfairness is a lack of equality and justice. From my perspective, every human with activated common sense knows when he or she is being treated unfairly, also known as unjustly. And from my perspective, there is nothing that can hurt and potentially will ruin a child or a child's self-esteem and confidence than when he or she is treated unfairly. How many of us adults and parents today that can truly and honestly say that we have never experienced being treated unfairly by our own parents and by those around us or by those that were closest to us? And how many of us can also truly and honestly say that we have never shown bias and impartiality among our children? Some of us may vividly remember our own parents talking about other people's children much more favorably than they talk about us, and treating other people's children when they sometimes visit our home or when they are around much better than us. We have parents that do that. Some of us may remember that. As mentioned before, the child or the children that has the pale skin, aka the lighter skin complexion, was treated much better in every respect than us that had the so-called and erroneously called, or the falsely and discriminatory called, black skin or the darker skin complexion. The child or the children that has the longer straight hair, they were treated much better than they were treated much better and with what we used to call kid gloves than us that had our natural curly and nappy hair. The pastor's children were treated like we used to say royalty. In fact, I remember being told as a child that Parson christened his picnic first, or the pastor would christen his child or his children first. The teachers, the doctors, and other professionals who were considered to be the most uppity and also known as high class and outstanding people in our community, and they were treated with kid gloves, even by our own parents. Sometimes our own parents would blame us for the wrongs and mischiefs or the mischievous behaviors of those children. We, the so-called ignoble ones, would always get the blame. From our own experiences as children being around other children, we know and experience favoritism. We know and experience partiality. We know and experience unfairness and injustice. And we know who were the children that were the untouchables. So far, a lot of us that are parents and adults today, we have learned from experience growing up as children what unfairness and unjust and injustice are. And how many of us that can truly and honestly say that we do not, or that we did not consciously and unconsciously treat our own children unfairly and show impartiality among our children today? So now you know why some of us or why some, if not all of our children and the children of today, now you know why they are so unjust and unfair to each other. It is because they learn unfairness from us, their parents and adults, and are now living and practicing what they have learned from us. And please, let us not for one moment forget where it all started and where it all came from. It is from the Adamic race and the devils. And I quote, "If children live with fairness, they learn the world is a nice place in which to live." Unquote. From my perspective, this stanza is more of a fantasy than a reality. This stanza in this poem is more of a fantasy than a reality. And it is actually the only one in this poem that portion of which I disagree. I disagree with. Or at the very least, I had some challenge making complete sense of it. If children live with friendliness, I think I may have said fairness. If children live with friendliness, they learn that the world is a nice place to live. The operative word here in this sentence is the word if. If is a conditional clause, or more correctly, it introduces a conditional clause. In other words, it is saying things can only be so if or when certain conditions are met. If children live with friendliness, then this will be the result. In other words, if children are raised in a home in which friendliness abounds, or if children were raised in an environment where geniality abounds, then they will learn that the world is a nice place in which to live. So let us dig a little bit deeper into this statement by first asking the following questions. And let us be as true to ourselves as possible with the answers we come up with. Number one, what is meant by the world is a nice place in which to live? And to answer this question correctly and honestly, we must first answer the questions. What is the world? Or what is meant by the world? By meaning and definition, the world is the earth. Together with all of its countries, peoples, and natural features. And for all intents and purposes, when we say the world, or when we talk about the world, we know that we are talking about our planet called Earth, and all life and life forms that we know on it, which of course include all human civilizations. From a philosophical and metaphysical perspective, the world is the whole of the physical universe. Or, ontologically, the world of an individual, also known as an individual world. Example, the world that one creates in his or her mind. Now, what is meant by the word nice? Here are the meaning and some synonyms for the word nice according to one Google search dictionary. Pleasant, agreeable, satisfactory, delightful, fine, or subtle. Unquote. In other words, utopic or utopia. 4. Is the world really and truly a nice place in which to live? So in reality, is the world as we think we know it today a pleasant world, an agreeable world, a satisfactory world, a fine and subtle world, a utopia or a utopic world, etc.? I personally don't think so. 5. Now, with all its imperfection and hostility, is the world the only one that most of us know and are aware of living and surviving in? Now, with all its imperfections and hostility, is this world the only one that most of us know and are aware of living and surviving in? And the answer is yes. I also happen to think and believe that prior to the invasion, capture, subjugation, and domination of our planet by Satan and his host of devils, coupled with the creation of the Adamic race and races, also known as the civilized races of mankind, this world was indeed a very pleasant world, an agreeable world. It was a satisfactory world, a fine and subtle world, a utopia, a utopian world, etc., in which our most honorable African ancestors lived and coexisted peacefully, or at the very least, coexisted symbiotically with all their fellow natural earthlings for hundreds of thousands of years, if not for millions of years. 6. Is it possible that it can be, or that it can or may one day become a pleasant, agreeable, satisfactory, delightful, fine and subtle world? A utopic or a utopian world? Is it possible that it may once again become like that? And my answer is, to all those who believe, the answer is yes. 7. Is it my hope, dream, for it to become a nice world for us all to live in? And the answer is yes. It is my sincere hope and dream. 8. Should we all as humans aspire for it to become a nice world, aka a utopian world, by doing all that may be required and all that is in our powers to bring it about? And again, my answer is yes. Number 9. Can raising our children properly and in an environment of friendliness help make this world a better place to live in, while helping to bring about a nice utopic world? And the answer is also a resounding yes. But the reality is this, or the reality is that the evidence coupled with our own life experiences shows that this world is not currently a nice one. Or at the very least, this world is not yet the nice world that potentially it can again become, or the utopian world that some of us all dreamed of. I think that if we are wise, then we have to raise our children in an environment of friendliness, while teaching them the fact that the world outside the home and their immediate environment is definitely not the world at home. We have to teach them the fact that the world is one of noise and haste, as mentioned in Desiderata. Using wisdom and discretion, and at the appropriate time, we have to teach them that this world is indeed a mercilessly mean, harsh, judgmental, and unforgiving place to live. And that if they are not properly trained and prepared, then they will enter amid the noise and haste like sheep to the slaughter, and to be eaten by the sharks, the predators, the human piranhas that awaits them. And above all, we have to teach the unadulterated truth as to who and what are our real enemies, who and what are our real foes, who and also who and what are the real and true devils. among us. And finally, on this point, from my perspective, there is significant difference between a house and a home. A lot of us were raised in a house and not a home. And a lot of our children today are being raised in houses and not homes. But that is another topic for discussion at another time. Home, if or when properly defined and understood, is where it all began on this side of reality. And the world is what it is today as a result of what has taken place and what is taking place in our homes or the lack thereof. Our first life lessons begin at home. For example, that which is called love or the thing called love begins at home. Charity begins at home. Manners and respect begins at home. Kindness begins at home. Honesty begins at home. Integrity begins at home. Fairness begins at home. Leadership begins at home. Friendliness begins at home. Character development begins at home. Good begins at home and bad begins at home. You name it and the evidence will show. And the evidence has shown that everything begins at home. And that is why we have the saying such as proper home training. And there is no training like home training, etc. From home then to school, then to our churches, our place of worship, then to our community or to our village, then to our nation or country, and then to the wider world. The very sad but true reality is that the world is not necessarily a nice place to live. And not because one might be fortunate to be raised by parents in a home that was or that is very friendly and kind to them mean that they should naively expect the world outside to be friendly and kind to them. But much more on this point later. Now this is the end of part 5. Yes, the end of part 5 of this series of presentation titled The Art of Living Well, Another Perspective and Interpretation of Desiderata. And I thank you for listening thus far. Please join me in part 6 for the continuation and much more detailed expressions on this topic, the art of living well, another perspective and interpretation of Desiderata. I am the mystic philosopher. It is high time for reason and for reasoning. Ashe, 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 Ayase.